I invite you to be seated. So today we get to hear from the compilation of the greatest hits, right? The story of the Good Samaritan. This is a familiar story. Some more, some less. It is a story that oftentimes, I think, gets relegated into the area of good moral behavior, good ethical response to a person in need. And it is indeed that. On a surface level, we have this wonderful contrast between two people who ought to be the compassionate people, but who couldn't be bothered. So one of the delights of the juxtaposition of this gospel passage is the priest and the Levite. The Levite is somebody who would have been expected to be an expert in religious teaching and scripture, the law. So somebody who definitely knew the statutes and the ordinances, the commandments that are contained in the Old Testament scriptures. In other words, no excuse. You can't say, well, I don't know, I never heard that before. So a priest and the Levite both see this guy who is in terrible shape, who had been attacked and left for dead, and they couldn't be bothered. And this wonderful then contrast with the person who, by all expectations, would have been the one who should not have been responsive, the Samaritan. So you have to plug in the equivalent of a Samaritan in your own mind. Who are those people who are just all about themselves? Who are those people who are, don't expect anything good out of them because it's not going to happen. You're going to be disappointed. They're about me, myself, and I. They're looked down on by the rest of society. They're not properly cultured. They're not civilized. You have those people in mind. We don't have to name names. But in every generation, there are those who are esteemed, and there are those from whom nothing good is expected. And that would have been the Samaritans. Nothing good is expected out of those people. And yet, this is the guy who comes and helps out. So, again, on a surface level, we could just tell a morality tale. We could say, love your neighbor as yourself, help out the person in need. Okay, everybody go out and be nice and kind. Amen, we're done. But there's no need to say that. This is basic human compassion, and some will act on that, and some will have other agendas. But I want to suggest to you that on a deeper level, what motivates Jesus to tell this story is not about right ethical action, but about right relationship. And as I was thinking this week about the challenges that we have to loving our neighbor, one of the things that I think is in play is we have too many neighbors. So when people talk about the dilemma of seeing somebody in need, one of the well-meaning justifications for not stopping and helping is, if I stopped and helped every homeless person that I come across, I'd never get to where I was going. Now, is that true? I don't know, maybe in some places. Probably not as much in other places. If every time I saw somebody pulled over on the side of the road, if I felt this compulsion to stop and check on them and see how they were doing, I'd be late to a bunch of appointments, and I just can't afford that. I have things to do, I have places to go, that's why there is services that you can call to help people like that. We can't be expected to serve our neighbor at all times and in all places. And probably on a practical level, that's true. And so how do we think about the opportunities that come up in our lives that mirror this gospel passage? You're passing somebody by. By the way, the priest had an excuse. You may find it convincing, you may find it flimsy, but the priest's excuse was that according to the law, the ritual purity codes would have prevented that priest from literally getting his hands bloody and then going on to the next place to perform whatever rite or ritual he was going to provide. That would have made him unclean. And according to a strict observance of the law, he needed to preserve his ritual cleanliness and purity. And so somebody else would have to do the dirty work. Does that sound familiar? Ooh, I don't want to deal with that. That's too messy. Maybe it's actually physically messy and dirty and gross. Maybe it's emotionally messy. Maybe it's relationally messy. That person is a hot mess. I don't want to get involved with them. That's going to be a disaster. And so like the priest, we just kind of, give it a wide berth, because if you show a little teeny crack of compassion, they're just going to suck you up into their world of neediness and clinginess. So that's what was going on in this story. And so the argument about we should all just be good, moral, and ethical people doesn't hold up in reality. A priest that would stand up and just say that message, oh, that's really nice, and that sounds really idealistic and all well and good, but that's not how real life works. Is it? So what do we do? What do we do with a story like this that has an obvious message on the surface, but has a whole lot of complexity underneath that creates barriers for us when we're in those real life situations? And one of the things that influences our relational orientation towards the world, orientation towards our neighbor, even if we have too many neighbors in the broadest sense of the world, is our baptismal vows. And when I have the privilege of preparing people for baptism, one of the things that's extremely important to me is to say, this sacrament that you're requesting, if it's somebody who's taking these vows for themselves, or if it's parents on behalf of a child, I will say, this is hard work. We're going to do this service and it's going to be pretty, and we're going to use nice religious words, and we're going to pour some water, and there'll be pictures, and it'll be great. But it's not a ceremony. It's a declaration of intention of the way one lives one's life as a Christian in this world. And it's not superficial, simple. And so some of the vows that are asked in the baptismal covenant, by the way, they get harder as they go along. The first one is, will you continue in the apostles' teaching, fellowship, and the breaking of the bread and the prayers? Yeah, all right. You can do that for the most part. I won't read them all to you, but the fourth one is, will you seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? And the response is, I will with God's help. And that's the right answer. But what's the true answer? What's the answer that's going to flow from our words into the practice of our actions? Let me read the question again. Will you seek and serve Christ in all persons? Yikes. I'll seek and serve Christ in you because I like you, because you're friendly, and because you have a good sense of humor, and because I get along with you. Will I seek and serve Christ in the person that ticks me off and irritates me and it constantly annoys me? That's what this says. Will I seek and serve Christ in the person that has the opposite political ideology than I do, that I find just so hard to be with? That's what this says. Will I seek and serve Christ in the person that has disappointed me, that has abused me, that has tried to manipulate me. That's what this says. Loving your neighbor as yourself. See the hard work part of it? Not just the pretty ceremony of the church part of it. And then the next question, I think, gets even harder. Will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? You have dignity and you deserve to be respected. Probably you take that for granted. Of course I have dignity. Of course I deserve to be respected. I'm a good guy. I'm a good person. So other people should recognize that. But you know what? Everybody thinks that. Even the Samaritans, or the people that you substituted in your mind a few minutes ago that I asked you to translate, those people who are kind of, sketchy, those people expect that. And by the virtue of our baptism, we have said we're going to do that. See the hard part of this? And what underlies this is a relational commitment to God's beloved. And if we feel like we are beloved of God, and I would argue rightly so, what about the other people who also have just the same claim to being beloved of God? Well, yeah, but not everybody cares about God, and some people don't believe in God, and some people are atheists, and some people are antagonistic about God, and so it doesn't apply to them, right? And we get to be like the lawyer in the passage where it says, and wanting to justify himself, he says, well, who is my neighbor? Because I've got some categories in mind, but there's some other people who I don't think they deserve it. And the response is, well, let me tell you about somebody who doesn't deserve it. And let me tell you about what he did to a guy who was half dead on the side of the road. Who do you think was the one who acted as a neighbor? Oh, right, that guy. He is God's beloved. Even though we have barriers and we have challenges and struggles with other people, we as Christians in the world, by virtue of our baptismal vows, among other commitments of being followers of Christ, we are the people that need to exemplify doing the hard work of loving our neighbors as ourselves. And the reward that comes along with that is a spiritual reward. It is not always the warm and fuzzies of that relationship. Sometimes it won't be appreciated or even recognized. I sometimes imagine God showering all kinds of blessings upon the world. And what if God was like, you didn't say thank you, so you're not getting any more because you weren't sufficiently appreciative of my goodness. Yikes, I would have been out a long time ago. There's a whole lot of blessings that I don't appreciate, at least on a regular basis. And so it's not about being thanked. It's not about getting repaid. It's not about having that warmth and that closeness and agreeing on things that we care about. It's about recognizing other people in this world as God's beloved and us being committed to being vessels of God's love, whether we think it's deserved or merited or not. And that's the relational part of it. That's the part that the superficial kind of ethical instruction doesn't touch, because there's too many excuses on that level for us to pass up the calling to love our neighbors as ourselves. It's a privilege that we have to be called to be Christians in this world. And like many privileges, it requires a reciprocal commitment and effort. But as I hope you know from other experiences in your life, that you have had to dig deep and really pursue, it's exceptionally rewarding. And so when we have the opportunity to extend ourselves out and be in connection with the lives of others, particularly in circumstances that are unexpected or maybe a little bit risky. Remember the blessing that comes along with being able to be used in that capacity in the world. And remember the opportunity for unexpected moments of grace and beauty to occur when an extraordinary act of generosity or compassion is extended. You have the opportunity to be a participant in those extraordinary moments. And God opens up doors and windows for us to be able to walk through, to look through, to respond through on a regular basis. So the thing that I really like about that last question, will you strive for justice and peace among all people? What it does not say is, will you achieve justice and peace among all people? Will you affect justice and peace in the world in every situation? No, I can't do that. Will I strive for it? Yeah, I can do that. I'm not in control of the outcome. I'm not in control of the reaction of the other. It is not my agenda that's being served by my striving to be faithful to my baptismal vows. But it is within my control to put out the effort, to make the gesture, to extend the compassion and the love of God. That is our relational calling. That's the depth of the story of the Good Samaritan, and that's when the life of faith translates from being an intellectual set of beliefs and statements into a life-lived habit of action and disposition in this world. My prayer is that in this week to come, you have an opportunity to practice love of neighbor. And that when you risk making the effort to do that, putting yourself into maybe an unfamiliar or an uncomfortable situation in order to do that, that the blessing that you receive is akin to the stories that we hear over and over and over again from people who mine the depths of the life of faith. I thought I was the one who was helping out the other person. But when I look back on it, it turns out that I think I got the bigger blessing. Amen.